Welcome, welcome. Thanks everybody for being here. We are excited. We are excited to get started. Like I said, we have Chet Sutton on the line, our water hero, who is going to help us talk about adjusting run times in auto mode. One of the things we wanted to do with the webinar series is address both the lesser known features like we've done the last couple of weeks with reporting, and what we're going to do this week is take on the most frequently asked question that I get. So this is absolutely in the wheelhouse of every WeatherTrack water manager that's trying to manage the weather-based irrigation. And Chad is an expert at that, and so we are happy to have him as a resource here on today's call. Chad, I stole this from your LinkedIn profile where it says here you manage almost 1 billion gallons. How many WeatherTrack controllers do you manage, Chad?
I think I just ran an inventory report this morning that said 426. So we were working. Wow. Our goal is 500 this year.
Nice. I like that goal. 400's a good number. I got to tell you, not very many folks out there have that many that they manage. I personally have 2,000, but you know, who's comparing?
You can keep your 2,000.
There you go. All right, so what we want to talk about today is adjusting station run times, keeping your plant material healthy through the weather-based irrigation function called auto mode, or automated by WeatherTrack. And when we're talking about the WeatherTrack technology, automated by WeatherTrack is the way we program a station to have the controller manage or optimize your irrigation schedule. The controller will determine how often to water, how much to water, and how best to lay that water down. Now, in today's conversation, we're only going to focus on one piece of this puzzle, the runtime, the actual minutes that get generated when the controller irrigates. So we're going to do that by first talking about why you might need to make some adjustments, and then focus on the adjustments that can be made and the effect that those adjustments will have on your schedule. Along the way, we will do a demonstration of both the controller or how to make these adjustments at the controller and how to make these adjustments on the WeatherTrack Central or on the program page online. So first we want to drill into the basic versus advanced settings, why we might need to make changes, or why when I start to implement WeatherTrack on my sites, do I have some stations that maybe don't get quite enough, or have some stations that get more than what they need. And it really boils down to this idea of basic versus advanced settings. And when I talk about the WeatherTrack basic settings, these are the things that you'll fill out on day one, right? Part of the WeatherTrack system requires that when you install, you go through, look at all of your stations and identify the landscape variables that determine how much irrigation that station is going to need. So you go through and you program in what type of plants you have, what type of sprinklers you have, among other things. And those are what we call the basic settings, because those are the things that the controller would have no idea what those values should be until you tell it. Like the controller's just not going to know what type of sprinklers you have on a station until you program that in. So that is all programmed at the time of installation. Now, when that happens, the WeatherTrack applies what we call the advanced settings. And that is to say that the basic settings represent 7 of 16 different things that the controller considers when generating runtime. So to make it easy to program, WeatherTrack goes in and fills in the blanks that are left. We call those advanced settings, and we make assumptions about what those values should be based on a couple of things. First, based on the values that you programmed in for your basic settings. So different combinations of those settings create different results in the advanced settings. But we take your settings, combine them with university research and industry standards kind of stuff to fill in the blanks and make it something that you can program in a day, make it easy for the first-time programmer to get the job done. Now, what I like is that we give you values. We make these advanced settings so that it's easy to program. We also make them something that you can edit in case you have better information, right? So we give you an industry standard, but every irrigation system is different. And it's gonna, WeatherTRAK gives you the ability to dial in exactly what your system has if you know it. Just to Chad's point, earlier he said the words, you gotta make the information in the program match the information in the field, right? Once you identify what we're battling out there, the science and technology can take care of you. But until all of that matches up, you might be in for a battle, right? You might have some stations that need a little bit more or a little bit less water. So for today, we're going to really drill down. The best example of this is sprinkler type. When you go in and set the basic setting for sprinkler type, it doesn't actually control any runtime, but it puts into motion two advanced settings that do. We call those the sprinkler precip rate and the sprinkler efficiency. And both of those are instrumental in calculating a runtime for your irrigation stations. So before I bump into exactly that, that's a good place to go back to Chris Manchuk, see if I have questions about anything so far. Chris, do you have any Q&A questions for me?
Yes, the first one that came up here is understanding of target MAD and how the target MAD works and why users are getting high depletions and how they can use target MAD to get around those high depletions.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to it because it's not on the agenda for today. And it's a rabbit hole that I would love to talk about. We'll make that a future session. Sorry for that.
You know, when you think about this program settings concept, it's one of the things that makes WeatherTRAK very different than other smart controls even, where they may ask you a series of questions that then inform a schedule, which then allows runtimes to be manipulated for a series of stations. But WeatherTRAK is giving you independent zone control with each of these different settings that allows you to precisely dial in on a per zone basis a root depth or a plant type or a soil type or a precip rate or an efficiency setting, thereby giving you these Swiss Army knife tools to really get it right on a per zone basis.
And what I like about it is the better the information, the better the result, right? As close as we can to accurately reflecting what the challenges we face in the landscape, the closer we can get to identifying those things and putting them into the program, the better off WeatherTRAK is going to perform for you.
When I first joined this industry, one of the guys who's the co-author of our scheduling engine, a guy named Dave Pagano, who designs irrigation systems for companies like the Irvine Company and Disney, you know, said to me, all right, the ET is 0.25. What's the schedule? And without really knowing how to answer, I just sort of said, I don't know, is that a lot? Is there more minutes or less minutes? And he said, well, it has nothing to do with minutes. It has to do with what are you watering and how are you watering it? You know, so all this independent zone stuff goes into the proper schedule as opposed to just slapping a number of minutes on something and letting it run.
Absolutely. So let's drill into the specifics. I'll get back to the three settings that control runtime. Again, two of which are set into motion by the sprinkler type, right? When we're looking at the sprinkler type, it sets into motion two advanced settings. The first we want to look at is called precip rate. And the precip rate is the number of inches per hour that type of irrigation delivers into the target area. So if you have this little industry standard spray head, when you program that into the WeatherTRAK, we apply a default precip rate of 1.7, which means that WeatherTRAK thinks that this type of sprinkler head applies 1.7 inches of water into the target area in 1 hour's time. Or basically, precip rate means how fast are we applying water into the target area, measured in inches. And we have default values for every different type of irrigation equipment that we see in the field. But the trick is, when we apply a default, it is based on industry standards, but every irrigation system is a little bit different. And it really depends on what type of spray head and what type of nozzle you have on that head to actually dial in the precip rate. So I see spray heads that have a precip rate range starting at 1 inch per hour and going all the way to 2.5 inches per hour. So when we take that 1.7, that's kind of right in the middle. But if you're on the outlier side, on either end of that measurement, you might be getting a little too much or not quite enough, right? So,
and just so we know the relationship between those things, the bigger the precip number, the fewer minutes the WeatherTrack station will run, because we think we're getting a lot of water coming out of there, right?
absolutely.
So you're not going to get more water out of a station by changing precip up. You're going to get that by changing precip down.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, how do we get the real information? Like, what I'm endorsing for you is get the best information into the program. First of all, 90% of the WeatherTrack users will just trust the defaults, right? That's a great way of going. It's worked thousands of times. This is only something that you want to manage if you are a sprinkler nerd like myself. And so you can trust the defaults, and most of the time they work. But if you want to adjust based on your observations, my best users will take with them the manufacturer's literature for the heads that they're using. So in this example, I have a Rainbird chart that tells you exactly what the precip rate for all of the different Rainbird nozzles are. So you can, if you're doing an installation, if you don't want to trust the defaults, you can check the manufacturer's literature. Again, that depends on pressure, and every system's pressure is a little bit different. So it might not be exact, but it will be more specific for the heads that you have out in the field. Now, if you want to get super duper specific, you can audit the system. And Chet Sutton, who we have on the call, is through the Irrigation Association, what we call a Certified Landscape Irrigation Auditor, or a CLIA, if you're in the biz. And those guys know how to go out and do a cup test and figure out exactly what those numbers should be, and then you can plug them directly into the WeatherTrack. So again, the better the information, the better the result. Now, if you are not going to do that, you're not going to do an audit, and you just want to adjust the number to get the schedule to do what you want it to do, to Ben's earlier point, make sure that you understand when adjusting the precip rate, there's an inverse relationship between precip rate and runtime. So as you turn the precip rate down, you turn the runtime up. To say that a different way, the slower we're applying water, the more runtime we have to apply the right amount, okay? And I'll show you what that looks like in one of the demos. The next setting we want to talk about is the other advanced setting tied to sprinkler type, and that's called sprinkler efficiency. And we all know that different types of irrigation deliver water differently. And you see here in my example, I've got two different types of irrigation, spray heads and drip. And with the spray heads, we get a lot of water that doesn't land exactly where we want it to land. And that affects the efficiency. You can see in this picture, there's misting, there's water that just doesn't land exactly where we want it. So when we're talking about efficiency, the spray heads are far less efficient than drip heads, because those drip heads are dropping water exactly where we want it. We don't lose any to wind or any environmental factors. So the efficiency really is how well does your system apply the water that's running through it. And not only does that apply to the actual hardware, but it applies to the design and the installation and the maintenance of that system. Our efficiency numbers incorporate a good design, meaning that we have all of the earmarks of good irrigation, head-to-head coverage, two-sided irrigation. And if you don't have those things on your system, those are efficiency issues, right? We are trying to compensate the irrigation schedule for bad design, stretch spacing, those kinds of things. And so it's important to know for users that the WeatherTrack accounts for different types of heads and inefficiencies in different types of heads, but our default numbers always assume a sound design and sound head-to-head coverage kind of stuff. So if you don't have that, you might have luck managing those schedules efficiency. again, if you're going to manage using the efficiency, there's that inverse relationship. So by turning down your efficiency, you're turning up your runtime. A less efficient irrigation system needs to water longer to apply the right amount of water. Now, this efficiency thing comes with a warning. This is the biggest adjustment that you can make to a schedule. So by all means, feel free to do it, but remember that a 10% change in efficiency can mean as much as a 40% swing in irrigation, dependent on all of the other variables. So we really want to focus in on making that accurate, but not overdoing it, not just dropping your efficiency by 20%, because you can definitely mess stuff up. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to see if Chris Manchuk has any questions for me.
Nothing new there, no.
Okay, so now I just want to show you an example of what that actually looks like. Now, hopefully what you're seeing is my screen with a little LC. I want to teach you a trick today. To focus in on the programming of precip rate and efficiency, we want to take our controller and go down to stations, select the stations menu, and it'll bring up the programming for every individual station. So see, we're going to look at the programming for station 1. I scroll through, I see we're on automated by WeatherTrack. That's the first earmark. And we want to roll up here and see the type of sprinkler we have, right? And in this case, we want to set this, if we have spray heads, and I go to the next screen, it shows me the precip, right? So spray heads, we talked about being 1.7 inches per hour. If I go back and change this to rotor heads, we see that the precip rate changes. So every different type of sprinkler head has a different default precip rate and efficiency. And what the trick I want to teach you is when you're at the controller and you're managing the station settings, if you press the star button, it will give you a sneak preview of the schedule that's getting generated based on those settings. So in this case, I push the star button and I see that this station is going to water for 8.9 minutes or almost 9 minutes, 2 times to deliver all of the irrigation that it needs. Now what I want to show you, if I take my finger off that button, it takes me back to the settings. If I bump this precip rate up to 2 inches per hour, right? Now, instead of laying down 1 inch per hour, I've doubled the speed that I'm laying down that water. If I hit the star button, we can see that now instead of 9 minutes twice, it's watering 4.5 minutes twice. So because I doubled the speed of the application, I cut the runtime in half. So that is kind of what I wanted to show you. We'll also have a quick look at what efficiency does. If I go up to the efficiency, the default, anytime you're on the default setting, you'll see that default in parentheses. And with the default, I'm running 9 minutes. If I take that efficiency from 80% down to 70%, a less efficient system needs to water longer. So I've gone from 9 minutes to 10.2 minutes. So that's how we coax more runtime out of these stations. Now, again, this is for the super advanced users, only if you want to drill into these advanced settings. Would I recommend you kind of going down this advanced path? What I would recommend for all users is the percent adjust. Now, this is the last feature we'll want to talk about. A station by station percent adjust is like the easy button to get this done. We go in, for every station, we have a percent adjust that starts at 0, and at 0%, it's going to deliver exactly what the controller wants, right? 0% gives you exactly what the program is asking for. Now, if I adjust that up or down, behind the scenes, WeatherTrack is actually adjusting the ET that's getting calculated station by station, which is nice to know, because if your water district asks you to reduce your irrigation by 10% or 10% of ET, you can just use this feature to adjust that. But long term, what we see is a 10% adjustment equals a 10% adjustment in runtime, right? So it basically correlates to exactly what you think it should. And the reason I think that this is the easy button is because A, 10% means 10%, and B, plus means plus and minus means minus, right? None of that inverse relationship stuff to remember. If I turn it up, the runtime goes up. If I turn it down, the runtime goes down. So I think that this is the easiest one to use. It's also the only one that we can access from WeatherTRAK Mobile. The WeatherTRAK Mobile doesn't allow you to adjust advanced features on those station settings, but because this is a basic setting, it's right there on your app. So it's the easiest thing to adjust. All right, so if it were me, and this is just Ben's best management practice, the way I recommend that you adjust stations in auto mode is first try the defaults, run your WeatherTRAK defaults, see how they zoom in on the accuracy of your site. If they need a little bit more, a little bit less, use percent adjust to dial in the details. And only if you get to beyond where your percent adjust can catch, more than plus 25% or less than minus 50, would I go in and start focusing on those more advanced features. Chet Sutton, does that sound about right? Does that match your experience?
Hold on, Ben, I'm learning a lot. I'm taking notes. This is good stuff. I appreciate it. Yeah, this is all great. It definitely matches my experience out there in the field, and everything you're teaching me now makes sense. And I agree with everything you're saying for sure.
Hey,
So
Chad, when you commission a new WeatherTRAK controller, do you capture the old station or the old program runtimes and put those into WeatherTRAK as well for a reversion, to revert to a setting if something doesn't seem right, or do you just not bother with that?
Honestly, Ben, we don't bother with that. Sometimes what's in the controller at that time hasn't been touched in a long time, and it's not relevant to that moment in time. You might be copying a schedule from October when you're trying to do a controller swap out in May. So we found that focusing on the reality of every station's parameters, you know, all the auto settings that you need to pay attention to, especially the basic settings, those are much more important than trying to match what you were doing previously. Because if that's your goal of making your new WeatherTRAK runtimes match the old controllers runtimes, I don't think that's getting us any closer to eliminating waste and conservation potential.
Right.
So what do you do to manage your stations? Like, do you use the percent adjust, or do you audit? What do you do?
Yeah. So I like to use the percent adjust primarily when we want to have less water. And I always try and urge all of my team to not do wholesale percent adjust across every station. That's the one thing that drives me crazy is when I go into a controller settings and I see every station's plus 25%.
Yep, I had one station that was dry, so I percent adjusted everything, and now we're...
Yeah, and I always hear, oh, it's so easy to adjust everything at once in a WeatherTRAK. I love it. And so what I'm always cautioning and working on is those steps that you just had up on the slide deck, Mr. Coffey. I was, work with your defaults first and foremost, because all you have to do is match the reality of your situation with the data you're putting in WeatherTRAK, and you'll have amazing results. It's a no-brainer. But then with percent adjust, right? Try and use that only if you're getting too much water at first. If you're getting not enough water, revisit your defaults and get into some of the advanced settings to make sure that things match perfectly or as close to perfectly as you can. And then the last thing with precip rate and efficiency, yeah, those are the reality. And that's where I actually got into trouble as a brand new WeatherTRAK user and educator was you have to drill in your head the inverse relationships to precip rate and efficiency. I remember responding one time to somebody who claimed to be an expert. It was like one of my first days on the job helping people with WeatherTRAK. And they said, I'm getting way too much water. This thing's not saving any water, and I don't know what's going on. And I keep turning the precip rate down because I want less water. And I said, okay, that sounds right. You know, turn your precip rate down, less water. So I ran out there and the place is just completely flooded because the person in charge just kept turning the precip rate down, down, down. And when I got there, thankfully I had read up a little bit more on the drive over there. Shouldn't be reading and driving, but anyways, when I got there, I knew about the inverse and I said, hey, the controller is just asking us for reality. You're not actually going to be able to turn the precip rate down on your zone, right? It's not a magical flow volume control button. So we had a good laugh. We figured it out. We dialed in the right precip rate. Voila, thing works like a charm.
So Chad, in California, we've got in many locations for water agencies something called WELOs, or water efficient landscape ordinances, that you've got to comply with.
Yes, sir.
Especially in re-imaging plant palettes, the landscape designer has to come up with schedules based on ET over a 12-month system. You know, how, do you use those plans and kind of check your runtimes against what the landscape architect thought there would be, just to make sure the city planning commissions are satisfied with the water use?
Good question, Ben. We refer to it as a guideline, but those tables that they're using are typically a 30-year historical ET.
Right.
And honestly, with climate change and the drought that we just went through, as a guideline over 30 years, they're great. But as a moment in time being precise, they're not. So what we do is we try and more look to the total yearly budget as a better guideline of how much water we should use. Because, you know, I see it time and time again with our real-time ET budgets that we have, whereby July is not the peak of ET usage or the peak of ET, you know, June was or August is. It's just, you know, our changing weather patterns dictate how much water we need. And we need real-time ET pumped into our controllers to match a real-time ET budget. So all of those tables are great, but they're great from a planning for total water use, you know, ETWU and MAWA and all those fun alphabet soup things.
Right.
Absolutely. So I hate to interrupt. One thing I forgot something on the training, so I'm going to just jump right back. The one thing I promised to do is show you how the stations got adjusted online, and we didn't do that. So there is a trick to it. So again, we're going to adjust the station parameters starting at WeatherTRAK.net, going to the Smart Irrigation tab and the program page. And one thing you need to know about these settings is when you first sign up for WeatherTRAK, you're going to have all of your stations presented in basic mode. So if you can see this right here in the top corner of my auto mode, I have a view mode that says I want to just look at the basic settings, or I want to look at the advanced settings. And in the basic mode, you don't see the precip rate and efficiency, but you do see the percent adjust. If you want to adjust these things on WeatherTRAK.net, you need to open up the advanced section of the program page. And when you save that through, notice that it's now long enough that it runs off the end of the screen. So I'll shrink this up. And you can see here, right next to sprinkler type, this is where I would be able to go in and adjust my precip rate and my efficiency. So sorry I missed that, but I wanted to make sure that the demo got in there. All right, Chad Sutton, I have just a few minutes left, but I want to ask you, like I ask all my all my special guests, what does WeatherTRAK save you?
Okay, so I knew this question was coming because I've been watching these webinars, and you know, immediately I thought of some of the easy things like, yeah, it saves our clients water and it saves us time. But the biggest, most important thing that I can think of, Ben, is it saves us clients. And what I mean is it helps with our retention rate. Gachina is a landscape management company, and we want to manage our clients' landscapes forever. And WeatherTRAK gives us the ability to build trust with our clients because we're delivering the outcomes that we told them we could deliver on with this product and technology. And with the right management, it all goes smoothly. And the next thing you know, they want to keep us around for a long, long time. So
I love that.
WeatherTRAK saves us clients.
That is a great answer.
Because I hate
Chris
putting in a lot of work and losing a client.
Chris Manchuk, do you have any questions that I need to answer before we wrap it up?
There's just one that I answered, but you can probably expound upon it. And it is when you transition from watering on minutes to watering to ET, do you need a transition period, and how do you suggest doing that?
You don't really need to. You do want to watch it though, because again, the program is only as accurate as the information it has. We assume some things, including root depth, and if you've traditionally overwatered, some of the plant material might not be what we assume it is in the defaults, right? Overwatering causes shallow rooting. So depending on the conditions out there, you really just want to try the defaults and then watch and adjust. And there's no out of the box like best practice other than that.
Yeah, I mean, if turf panels are uniformly green, but they've been overwatered, they perhaps are bleeding under the root zone to compensate for poor distribution or poor uniformity, right? So when you go to ET, you might start to see brown spots, right, which may just be that there's no water creeping under the carpet. And so then on that particular zone, you might want to bump down efficiency a little bit and then therefore improve run times. And what that does, you can step back after doing that kind of calibration over a season and see, okay, 15% of my stations are 50% efficient. Maybe those are the stations that I request capital for to make improvements to the irrigation system in the following budget year. So you can use it as a tool for changes and extras in your work with your customers.
Absolutely. And one thing I always highlight to potential customers is that the WeatherTRAK is going to highlight where your system is inefficient, where those defaults will show you where you don't have head-to-head coverage. And so if you go with the defaults, we assume head-to-head coverage, and you might get dry spots in between where you don't have that out in the field. So it definitely does a bang-up job at just reflecting what that program has.
One more thing to think about too, if you're establishing new landscape material, right? So seasonal color or what have you, perfectly acceptable to put those stations in a user schedule and put the right amount of water on those to have them established. And then you could even use the middle setting, which is the user with ET, which just in case you got the minutes wrong, because we got a heat spike, our software will raise the number of minutes up to help compensate for that change in evapotranspiration.
And that is a subject for another day, Mr. Slick. So with that, we're going to just wrap it up. Go back to my PowerPoint, talk about what we got coming next for you. First of all, if you have questions that aren't addressed on today's webinar, please forward them to support@hydropoint.com. We're always here providing 6-day-a-week bilingual customer support at support@hydropoint.com or at the 800 number. And if you haven't checked out our training, we have free certified on-demand training at hydropoint.learnupon.com. And next week, we are excited to start our 3-part series on OptiFlow, talk about for the OptiFlow features and what that is bringing to our customers and the solution that provides. We have one of my very long time friends on the call next week, Joe Jackson from Sprinkler Supply in Utah, went the wrong way, who is also an expert water manager, and look forward to seeing what he has to say about OptiFlow. And that is it for me, guys. Just want to say thanks to everyone for tuning in and look forward to seeing you next week. Mr. Slick, you have any parting thoughts?
No, I used them all up.
All right. Mr. Manchuk?
No, that is all. There's a few questions here that we did not get to, but we'll make sure we follow up with you individually and get those answers out to everyone. Thanks for all the questions and feedback, folks.
All right. Last but not least, Chet Sutton, Water Hero. You got any parting ideas?
First of all, thanks, guys. This has been great. I love being a part of this, and I learn something new every time I watch these webinars, so keep it going. And I will say this, I ran a report, right? Ben, we went over reports, controller inventory report. We have about 8,000 stations that are active right now, and 7,200 of those are in auto mode.
Nice.
I'm going to spend the rest of the day.
You are a water hero, Chet Sutton. Thank you for that.
The rest of the day is why are 800 not in auto mode? That's the rest of my day.
Way to go. All right, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.